Welcome to the Back to Basketball podcast. Our hope is to inspire a change in mindset as well as a shift in the lifestyle and daily habits of basketball players. We wish to transform and effectively alter the lives of people who have been suffering from chronic pain by changing their perspective on their bodies and its abilities through empowerment, accountability, and consistency. We hope to help you completely turn your life around. Okay, so we have Matt Koenig, my good friend, my coach, and actually my former player, and we'll probably hear more about how that makes sense later. Matt is a former college basketball player. He is, I could probably say, former 3x3 basketball player at the world tour level. Lover of all sports. He's currently a physical education teacher, and he is the founder of Alliance Athletics. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for coming on.
Awesome, Darcy. Thanks for having me. Super pumped to do it. Let's get into it.
So let's get right into it. Like you said, can you tell me why, or do you remember when you decided, hey, you know what, I want to help people transform their bodies? I want to, maybe it wasn't when you started Alliance, maybe it wasn't that, but when you got that idea, that thing in your head, you know what, I'm going to help people.
Well, I grew up just playing a ton of sports, right? And so I got into coaching pretty early as well. And as soon as I graduated high school, I went back to my old high school and started coaching some basketball. And that really showed me that I had a passion for teaching and for coaching. And I didn't really know that I wanted to get into the training world yet. But as I, sort of grew and found myself as a coach and just with my own passion in terms of training my own body, I just ran to the right people and sort of where it was in situations where we were in, high performance gyms and we were working with trainers. And so I kind of shifted my mindset, I guess, away from the coaching. And so I really just became attracted to that environment and just helping people sort of get through those roadblocks as they go through their athletic journey. And I think just going through my own experience has really help me identify with other people and then, want to help them as well for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I love hearing the stories, because it's often our experiences, especially when it comes to coaches. We've experienced something, and through our experience, we want to maybe help people avoid some of the things we had to go through to learn that, and we want to fast track them or get them to a better place quicker. So, looking at Alliance, I mean, that's essentially what you're all about. So was there a moment was there an aha moment when you're like, hey, look, we're doing this. This is what it's going to be about. I'm going to start a business around it, right? So you're not coaching high school kids, you're not helping people in the gym, but you're actually like, hey, I'm going to start a brand and an idea and a business around doing
that. It's tough to say when that sort of aha moment happened. I know the moment where, because I was training people in person for a couple of years before I really started getting into the online space and wanting to create that community sort of, a program to sort of help people and everything. But before I got into that, I was doing in-person training. And I think what really sort of changed my course was when my body was breaking down. So, I started out, I grew up not the most, physically talented player. I wasn't very big. I wasn't super explosive. And so that was my first taste of training, was just training my body to be super explosive, super strong, super athletic, so I got into the vertical jump training world. And what I found is just my body broke down. And the common information that was out there was leading me down a path of dysfunction. So my feet were a wreck, my ankles were a wreck. And actually, I got prescribed double ankle surgery just because my ankles were so tight and so beaten up and imbalanced compared to the larger muscles in my body. And so that really set off alarms in my mind that, I needed to take a different course of action. I needed to increase my knowledge. I needed to, seek other ways to help people, just because I found that the common stuff that was out there and the stuff that was readily available to me was leading me down this path of dysfunction, right? So I saw so many people around me, having the same issues, just, bad, tight ankles, foot pain, knee pain, low back pain. And so I really that really gave my head a shake. And around this time I was leaving the country for work. So I was teaching overseas, and I took that extra time to really dive into new material and take a step back from the in-person world and really just elevate my knowledge base. And that's what sort of like set those wheels in motion to forming Alliance Athletics. At the time when I was training in person and when I went overseas, it hadn't quite taken shape yet. I knew in my mind I wanted to create this resource for people to help them pull themselves out of dysfunction as well. So when I was overseas, you just sort of pull yourself out of your own environment. It sort of allows you to see things with better perspective. And so I just took advantage of the time. And when I came back to my hometown, I established Alliance Athletics, started, building a library of information and creating our programming. And then that led me to where I am today.
Yeah, I love that story. This is my favorite story, is again that hero's journey. You essentially were breaking down and you had a choice, right? There's like a fork in the road. You could have said, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to trust these doctors and get this surgery, which a lot of people do. A lot of people go that route. They get the surgeries, they trust their medical professionals. And now this is not a bash medical professionals session. We have plenty of professionals that are coming on this workshop and helping spread their information and the knowledge. But the big key in that is that you thought there could be another way, and you took the ownership and you said, look, I have to do this myself, or at least try. Because at the end of the day, if you would have tried and nothing happened, well, you had that ankle surgery as a backup, right? Hey, you know what? This isn't going to work out. But that's a huge thing, is educating yourself and then taking ownership of your situation. And I think, when it comes to injuries specifically, you don't see as many people doing that. What they tend to do is they'll go to their professional and they'll say, fix me. You do it for me, essentially. When it's the other way around. And you'll ask any physiotherapist or any athletic therapist, they don't believe that it's their job to fix their patient. They give them things like come in, but the people don't do them. And so there's a disconnect there that exists, where it had that space of like the information you get from your athletic therapist or physiotherapist, or even your trainer for that matter, and what you do on your own. There's a gap, because when you're not with them, you have to do stuff, right? And so I love your story, because you took it a step further and you said, okay, I got all this information, now I'm actually gonna help people. And for me, that's unbelievable. So you mentioned your injury history. So can we talk a little bit about that? So potential ankle surgeries. Can you talk about maybe how you felt when those things were happening? So when you were injured and you couldn't do something, or you thought you had to get surgery, your mindset around that, how you felt as an athlete at the time, because you were an athlete and you wanted to compete. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to take it back one step just to respond to one thing you said, like taking ownership of your own body, I think is like the number one thing you can do, right? Because and you're 100% right. Like, we're not here to trash medical professionals. Like, I like to stay in my own lane. I don't try and pretend that I'm a medical professional, that I have better advice. It's simply just society as a whole right now. When you take the average person off the street or off the field or courts, if they're an athlete, they don't have it in their mind that it's their responsibility. They go to the doctor seeking like, hey, just fix me, right? They treat it almost like an auto body shop. And so what happens is those doctors now, they can try and explain to you, oh yeah, you can increase your range of motion of your ankles and you can do all these exercises. You can go down this path of self-development and start, creating a plan for yourself. Like, people don't want to hear that. They just want to hear, what pill do I have to take and what surgery do I need to fix this, right? So, when I got prescribed ankle surgery, like it was a shock to myself, right? It was a wake up call. And, so I just think that as a whole, I think society needs a little bit more enlightenment, or maybe like people really just need to wake up and understand the fact that they're in charge of their own success and their own health. And there's also like a money component too, and the medical industry and has to make money, and so like those surgeries and stuff like that, like I understand why that happens and why, in my opinion, surgeries get overprescribed. But yeah, not to trash medical professionals at all. So yeah, like to go back to your question, in terms of my injury history, like I said, it was a massive jolt to my own ego and to my mindset. I'm thinking, I'm pretty athletic. I'm a good athlete. I train hard. I take care of myself. I'm a trainer. I'm taking care of other people's athletic goals. I should be healthy, right? And I should be able to train my body and be proficient doing that. And so it was really just a jolt to my ego, a hit to my ego, and also just a wake-up call that I needed to do something differently, right? And so what the case with my ankles was actually is that because I was doing so much heavy strength training, my feet were simply not able to handle the forces that I was putting through the ground. So I started realizing I had to warm up for an hour to jump or to really explode through the ground, and almost trick my body into allowing me to do that. And so I could still jump super high. I was getting up over the rim, dunking, all this type of stuff, but I was just in pain. And the next day I felt like garbage, and my reduced range of motion in my ankles led to my feet flattening and overpronating, which then in turn, put more stress on my feet because they weren't functioning properly. My ankles would, my Achilles tendon was extremely tight and limited in terms of range of motion. And so I literally was told by the doctor that I was at risk of tearing my Achilles, and that the best course of action was to, cut it and lengthen it. And so when I heard that, I was like, I'm not sure if we can swear on this, but I was like, fuck that. Like, I don't want to listen to that. Like, I'm not going to take myself out of sports for a year and a half. And as we all know, with some of the Achilles injuries that have happened, like in the NBA circles nowadays, people don't always come back from that, right? And I'm like a 25-year-old guy, and I'm not looking to miss out on like my prime as an athlete, right? Because I had an ankle surgery, I might not ever recover from that. So I thought, just like you said, like, if I really can't fix my ankles, I have this surgery in my back pocket that I can do, but let me just see how far I can take this. Let me see how much improvement I can make, and let me see if I really need this, right? And so that I'm just really happy that I took that route, right? And now my goal and my mission is to give that autonomy to other people and give people a pathway out of that dysfunction and a pathway to really just hitting their athletic peak. That's like my biggest goal, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's great, with the whole taking accountability for your bodies, because, the analogy I use, which just works, is it's like brushing your teeth, right? If you're, okay, yes, there's a genetic factor in everything. And I guess this can be said about the body, right? You may just have a situation where, surgery is the only option, and it might be too late, whatever. There's lots of variables, just like your teeth. Some people have actual teeth that they just have really weak teeth. They brush them all the time and they're like, I'm eating great. And they start getting cavities. But the vast majority of people, if they brush their teeth regularly, they won't get cavities. And if they do, it's once in a while. And that's the only time that you really go to the dentist for like an operation, right? Other than that, they just clean your teeth, which is fine. Like, hey, clean my teeth. That's not a surgery, right? That could not be equated to a surgery. So I always tell people, like, taking care of your body, it's no different. You take accountability of your teeth all the time. You brush your teeth. It's not weird. There's nothing strange about it. So would it be weird just to do some mobility work for 5 minutes every morning? No, it wouldn't be weird at all. Because if you sit at a desk all day and you're not doing mobility work for 5 minutes in the morning, or getting up and walking around during the day, or taking your lunch break to get your body moving, well, you're probably going to have problems. Just like if you decide not to brush your teeth for a year and a half, it's the same thing. And so I always tell people that. So taking a step further, you're a trainer. You were a trainer. You are a trainer. So looking at people who come and they have injuries, what is your training approach? Not as much literally like, hey, I put them through these exercises, but your ideology, and maybe talk a little bit about, what your mindset is, or what type of focus you have on the modifications to the exercises, right? So like we'll use back pain for this one because it's an easy one. Someone comes in, they don't have a back injury, like I can do stuff, but they're like, my back hurts when I do stuff. The next day I have pain, but I can still do the movements. So maybe just talk about your ideology around helping those people, and then maybe talk about some modifications to the programming.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, like I like to stay in my own lane. So I'm never gonna say like, that my advice is the same as medical professionals, right? I'm never gonna cross that line. So my biggest thing, and I would say my key point, or my key part of my ideology, I would say, is just training ability. So in terms of like back pain, what I find with most people is that they might be, semi-functional. They might be able to, go through their day-to-day life. They might even be able to play sports. They might be able to lift, all of these things. But they have something sort of holding them back, right? It might be pain. It might be tightness. It might be a lack of strength. There's a whole bunch of different reasons. So what I really focus on is the ability of that joint or of that structure in your body, right? So I haven't really seen many people who have a fully functioning back that can bend in all different directions. They can load it. They can do all different types of motions with their back, as well as having, great flexibility, great strength, all these different attributes, and then still have that dysfunctional, that limiting pain, or that dysfunctional movement pattern, whatever it happens to be. I don't really see that very often. And then in that case, then it would be time to go see a medical professional, right? There might be something else going on. There's a whole bunch of different underlying issues with chronic pain. And sometimes it's literally your mind telling you that you're in pain. That's why you're feeling pain, right? So I don't pretend to have every answer in the book, but what I really focus on is training the ability of that structure. And then from there, people are always able to inch forward and make progress, right? So when you expand the range of motion, you expand the strength through full range of motion of that structure, it will lead to improved results, right? Improved results in terms of performance, but also how much resiliency do you have, right? And how much capacity does that joint or structure have to do tasks, right? So I would say that's my main sort of focus is just to train the ability. And then in terms of, I think I'm remembering right what you asked, but just take like my ideology in terms of how I would program exercises is just to not train through pain. So along with training ability, we're not pushing through those painful ranges of motions. We're not trying to force our body into uncomfortable positions. We might bump into pain, but we're not going to go through it. We're not going to complete reps that are painful and all these types of things. What I find is that a lot of times people are injured, or they might have these problems in their body. A lot of it is just due to overuse and bad movement patterns. In my experience. So there'll be someone who they'll say, oh, like my back is wrecked, or my knees, they ache every day. Yet that person's still going to the gym every day, and they're still not warming up and then playing basketball, or they're like lifting super heavy, and then they're wondering why their back never gets better, right? So what I find is that a lot of people, they struggle with taking themselves a step back out of that problem and actually assessing what they need to do and then taking action on it. If you want different results, you have to do different things, right? So I would say those are my main two things, is just don't train through pain. I say it all the time. Stop doing it. It's not productive. You're not tough. You're not a better athlete because you do it. People like to say that, and then just how much ability does that joint actually have?
Yeah, and I think, full disclosure, obviously, I myself have recently just started the Alliance programming, so I'm maybe 2 months, and it's crazy, I thought it was important that I share this, because when I say this, I'm someone who's suffered with back problems. And before I started the programming, my back was actually, it was strong. So I had one part of it. The strength, I could do stuff, I was fine. But I had some limitations, right? So there's things that I wasn't able to do that if I did do those things, then that would have probably led to injury. So my back was essentially protecting itself from the potential injury that I had.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say one thing. So that, like, a lot of times what happens is the body is trying to, like, your body is an ultimate tool of efficiency. So a lot of times, like, sometimes the pain or the ranges of motion that you don't have access to, it's your body telling you, like, no, you don't have the strength. You don't have that ability yet. So I'm not going to let you get into that range. So, like, that I don't want to go too long, let you finish your point, but a lot of times what's happening is you're fighting against your own body. And so a lot of times people just want to drive through that, right? Like, they think they can just push right through that and they're going to get results. And so a lot of times people run into problems that way.
Well, no, that's perfect, because you're essentially supporting exactly what I was going to say. Is in me doing the programming, it took me a while before some of these patterns that were protecting me, right? Like, in all accounts, they were protecting me. They're allowing me to function as an athlete. But it took a while for those patterns to break. And in doing so, I've been able to access certain flexibility in certain ranges that I didn't have before, and I'm strong in them. But it was done very meticulously. It was step by step, and it was slow. And you know what? Like, I think I'm in 2 months in, and I've only now started adding any sort of weight to any sort of leg exercises, right? So, that is just, I bring that up kind of just to strengthen all the things you were saying before, is that how important it is to take that full, like, almost like a holistic view of your body, right? It's not just about, like, oh, your back hurts, but it's, there are other factors that could be causing your back to hurt. It's not your back may just be the result of all these other things. It's likely what it is. And so, even myself, I wasn't in a pain phase or anything like that. Taking this method, I was able to go step by step and slowly, and ever so slowly get to a point where I was like, wow, I've had huge growth. And I can compare that back to when I was injured, and then I went on my own path to becoming, like, pain-free. The same thing. It was a slow process. It was a slow process. And I think a lot of people want, like, quick results, and so, I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about, and maybe in your past you were one who wanted, I mean, I'm almost positive you're one who was training under the quick results method. I want to do this, so I got to do this to get there as quickly as possible, almost taking the shortcut versus taking the steps, you're taking the elevator type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, like, that's a big issue, I think. And it's I think that's part of the reason why in the fitness industry there's so much it can be misinformation, but sometimes just information used in the wrong context, just because people want those quick results, right? Like, from my experience in terms of vertical jump training, that's how I got into athletic development, and I got into the training industry that way. I was a culprit of that, right? Like, I'm guilty of it. So, I'm looking up online, how do I jump faster today? How do I jump faster in the next hour? How do I jump faster I got 8 weeks, right? Like, what am I going to do in this next 8 weeks so that I can get the most amount of results possible? And so I think a lot of times in the training industry, and this was, like, one of the things that sort of, like, stuck with me, and how I wanted to change, or I wanted to do something different than what most people are doing in the fitness industry, is that right now the average athlete, or the average person who's looking for a trainer or a program to do, they want those results quick, right? And they don't want to be bogged down with, like, oh, we got to fix your mobility in your ankles before we squat, right? I just want to squat right now. Like, what can you do to me right now? What mobilization, what pill can I take so that I can do this right now? And just that short-sightedness just really leads to issues down the line. It creates dysfunction, right? Injury, overuse, imbalances in the body. And then the ironic thing about that is that when you train from a short-sighted perspective, you actually end up taking a longer route, because, you can maybe if I wanted to make you jump higher next week, right? We would do a whole bunch of plyometrics, a bunch of explosive lifts, right? So to get your body like firing on cylinders right now, right? But what might happen is as soon as you stop training, those results diminish, right? Because all you've really done is trained your, it takes more than 2 months to get any type of muscular adaptation. In the first month or two, all you're really training is your nervous system to run more optimally, right? So if all you ever do is you do high performance training and you do box jumps and you do depth jumps and max approach jumps and mix them with heavy squats, yes, you might jump higher next week. You might even jump higher today. But what happens when you stop doing that, right? You might completely regress, or because you're not taking care of all the little steps first, you might get injured. And then what happens is now you got to take 2 months off training to rehab an injury. And now, you might have taken a big step forward, but now you're taking, another step back, right? So you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly. Whereas if you take the long-term approach, yes, you might not get the results that you're looking for today or tomorrow. It might take a couple months, a couple years even until you really hit your peak. But if you can really focus on not having those common injuries that are in most cases avoidable, you're just always going to be taking another step every single year. Mm-hmm. And then I believe that you're going to have a much better chance at actually hitting your genetic peak. Rather, most people, by the time they're 26, 27 years old, as a male, we physically peak around, in our late 20s. A lot of male athletes don't even get to that point. By that time, they're already broken down and they're not even able to perform anyways, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of ironic to me that short-sighted approach ends up taking people in a big loop anyways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, man. I love that point though. Just about you go the short route is again, shortcuts just don't pay off, man. That they just don't pay off in the end. And that is now taking that exact perspective and placing that on someone who is trying to come back from an injury. It's the same thing. There is no shortcuts. It's like every little step you take that's the journey that you have to go through, right? And I think a lot of people who have injuries, they are like, I'm back in 6 weeks no matter what, and then they force themselves back, or they do
or they think it's like a toughness thing, right? Like you see it a lot of times in professional sports. Like, yes, they're playing for money and all these, there's other factors involved, but young athletes, they look at those professional athletes and it'll be somebody like Kobe saying, oh yeah, I play through broken ankles and I play through broken fingers and I just, I push hard because I'm passionate, right? So then the young athlete listens to that and then thinks, well, I'm hurting right now, but I don't want to miss out, right? I want to show my coach that I play through this, right? And it's not healthy in a long-term approach. And I think people really need to realize that, we are an animal, right? And we are a product of all of our combined movements. Like every movement that you do over the course of your life, you are a product of that. So if you sit around all the time, you're not really active or taking care of yourself, and then you think that just walking in the gym and lifting really heavy for an hour and then doing some jumps is going to like transform your body. Yeah, you might get some improvement, but like that's not the most optimal way to make your body function at the highest level possible, right? You have to be a product of all of your different movements, right? So what are you doing in your off time? Are you recovering? Are you taking care of your mobility? How's your nutrition? Are you sleeping properly? Are you taking care of all these other things, right? I think a lot of people, they just kind of think that, well, I'm going to find a good workout and I'm going to do it. I'm going to get those results, right? And that short-sighted approach again, just, it bites people in the ass. In terms of where they want to go.
Yeah, and I like that. So maybe you can talk about taking that and we talk about basketball players specifically. So, basketball is, I mean, every sport is unique in its own right, but basketball has certain demands on the body, certain twisting and pivoting, landing on one foot, jumping off one foot, landing on two. There's like all sorts of crazy stuff that happens. I mean, and so maybe if you're looking at maybe it's a two-part question. Like the first part is what are the most common injuries that basketball players tend to have, but then looking at it from the trainer's perspective, what are like maybe the most common movement patterns or things that you emphasize for basketball players specifically, right? So if you put it this way, if you had, like you have 2 months to work with this basketball player, you're never going to see them again. What are like maybe 3 things that you really want them to be like, hey, I'm going to make sure that they're clean on this. And then, so maybe kind of parallel that with like what their most common injuries are.
Definitely. Yeah. That's a great question. So, with Alliance Athletics, we screen every athlete that comes through our program. And so what we've really noticed, and this is, I take part in this as well, right? Like I had my bad ankles, but ankles and feet for basketball players are just, to not put it lightly, the trash in most cases. Pretty much 100% of the athletes that have come to us that are court sport athletes have poor range of motion in their ankles. And all of that dysfunction in any lower extremity that you have travels up the chain, right? So your feet are your first point of contact on the ground, and your ankles are right above them. So if those aren't functioning properly, everything else is going to fall in line with whatever your feet and your ankles are doing. So an example of that, or how to apply it, is if you squat and you have poor range of motion on your ankles, or you don't push your knees over your toes, you take some pressure off your knees and your feet, but your lower back now experiences 10 to 12 times the amount of forces compared to if you were squatting with optimal form, allowing your knees to travel past your toes and having optimal range of motion at your ankles. So I think people just don't really seem to understand, and like it's hard to understand because there's so much misinformation out there. The whole myth of, and this is the next thing I would say, or the next point I would make in terms of basketball players, because they have such poor range of motion at their ankles, the knee isn't able to travel forward over the toe when they're playing basketball, or when they're squatting or deadlifting or doing any type of training movements. That myth of not pushing your knee over your toe while lifting or while playing your sport all stems from a study done 30, 40 years ago, where the study was simply looking at the forces that were experienced at every joint when an athlete would squat. And so when you wouldn't push your knees over your toes, no shit, you wouldn't have the same amount of force going through your knees, right? But that same study also proved that now that force is now amplified 10 times on the lower back. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but the point is that when you avoid ranges of motion, optimal range of motion in the ankles, and you don't push the knees forward, well, your lower back now is taking on that force, that extra force, and it's amplified even more as you go up the chain. So I think like those are the two sort of most common injuries or dysfunctions I see with basketball players. It's just the poor range of motion in the ankles, and then that leads to the knee not traveling over the toe. And then because athletes are not trained to train knees over toes and push the knee over the toe when they're training, when they go and they play sports, the knee travels over the toe on every step you take. Try and walk downstairs and not allow your knee to cross your toe. It's impossible. Try and pick something up off the ground without your knee going over your toe. Try and run forward without your knee going over your toe. So all these different movement patterns require the knee to travel over the toe and to have good range of motion at the ankle. And we're avoiding, for the most part, the training industry is avoiding this range of motion. And so what happens is, because you don't train it, you don't strengthen it, now you go and you play, and now you have knee pain. Now you have tendinitis, tendinopathy, patellar tendinitis, quadricep tendinitis. There's all these different things that happen because we're not taking actionable steps to actually deal with that. And a lot of it too is just, society as how we live as a society nowadays, right? Like humans evolved walking up and down terrains, right? Walking up and down uneven surfaces. And so your ankles were, you evolved to have mobile ankles that as you're walking uphill, your ankle can dorsiflex, right? To accommodate that. And as you're walking down the hill, you're able to decelerate, and all, the tibialis anterior, your shin muscle, is able to slow you down a little bit, right? But nowadays we just walk around on concrete with, inch-high shoes of foam, and we don't walk up and down slopes anymore. We walk upstairs, or we take elevators or escalators. And so again, you're a product of your environment, and you're a product of your total movement, right? Throughout your entire life. So when we avoid those key movement patterns that we evolved as a species having, now we run into those issues in terms of pain and dysfunction and injuries and everything else. I think I might have missed the second half of your question.
No, the second half would just be, so now you have that basketball player, maybe talk about 2 or 3 things, like, I mean, actual things, if you're giving advice, hey, you need to, work on this specifically, and maybe talk about some of the key exercises that you would prescribe or
Totally.
this athlete to do.
Totally. Yeah. So yeah, segueing into the next point. So now that we look at basketball players and they have the reduced range of motion at the ankles, they have the knee pain, those 2 common things, jumper's knee it's called, right? Because a lot of basketball players have it. The thing I would focus on the most is ankle range of motion, right? Because all those players, they have that reduced range. So a good example of an exercise, anyone can look on our Instagram page and see it. I post it quite a bit. And just try and throw it in people's face as much as possible, is the Patrick step up. So essentially you're standing on a platform and you're reaching your other foot down, getting a maximum stretch on the back of your ankle. And so you're loading the movement and stretching at the same time. So you're not only mobilizing it, but you're strengthening it as well. So I would say that's the one thing I would focus on for the ankles. If I were to give one exercise to basketball players to take care of their ankles, Patrick step up, improve that range of motion at the ankles. And then an ATG split squat, essentially a split squat or a lunge, but pushing the knee over the toes and training that knee to actually handle those forces would be the other one that I would give people. You can also do a Poliquin step up. It's coined by Charles Poliquin, where I've taken a lot of information from, and he used to work with Olympic downhill skiers. And so that's one of the main exercises that he would do with his downhill skiers. And, if you want to find someone who needs stable knees, those downhill skiers, as they're going over those moguls and stuff like that, there's like thousands of pounds of force going through their knees. And so the Poliquin step up, they use it in some physiotherapy clinics as well, as another great way to strengthen and bolster the knee joint and, help it handle the forces of playing the sport. But really just training those ranges that you use in the sport, I think, is the most important thing. And that's what I would really focus on with a basketball player. Because the thing is too, is because, how the training industry is in large part nowadays is, they're going to get those heavy lifts and plyometrics from somewhere else because everybody's doing it, right? But the one thing that a lot of people are missing is range of motion at the ankles and knee health. There's a lot of other things too that can go into that. But if I focus on those things with an athlete, or I give them the tools to be able to take care of those issues on their own, then they'll get the strength, they'll get the triple extension, they'll get the plyometrics, and they'll get the max jumps and everything. They'll get that from somewhere else, or they'll see it on Instagram because that's everywhere, right? But those key things, that's what I would really focus on.
Yeah, and I like that. And so for clarification, you'll see all of Alliance Athletics social handles on our page, and obviously, below this video you can find that. So definitely check out some of those exercises. And just to clarify, Matt, like this type of stuff, I think you talk about it in the videos. Obviously, nope, don't train through pain, and most of these things will be done without weight if you've never done them before. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. So don't train through pain. And then strength through length. Another massive key that we focus on with our athletes at Alliance Athletics. Your body, a lot of times, like I said earlier, the reason why you're tight, or the reason why your muscles don't move the way you want them to, you don't have the range of motion, is because you haven't earned that range, right? Or a lot of times, a good example is we sit all the time nowadays. Well, if your body is the ultimate tool of efficiency, which it is, and you're constantly sitting with your your hip flexors in a shortened position when you're sitting. Well, your body wants to find the easiest way to sit in that position because it sits there every day for 6 to 8 hours for some people. What's the most efficient way that, you know, this body can sit there? Well, we're going to tighten up the hip flexors. We're going to tighten up the lower back so that you can sit there with as little effort as possible, right? So what we really focus on is we strengthen the full range of motion. And what happens then is when you not only stretching is good to kind of open up some range of motion, but to make it permanent, you have to use that range. Teach your body to activate the muscles and gain strength in those, you know, end ranges of motion, and you'll see your flexibility improve faster than any stretching routine that you can put out there. So strengthen your full range of motion, and you will earn that mobility through strengthening.
Yeah, and I love that. Like, you know, there's something a common theme that has come up a couple of times from you now, and I've shared the same ideology around this theme, is the idea that, you know, we are animals and our bodies are optimized to do all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's people that exist right now on this earth that can climb trees, like fly up the trees, and in their culture, they've been doing it their whole life. Their ankles bend, they do crazy stuff. Our bodies are very adaptable. And like, so just doing stuff that, you know, is going to allow our body to function better without pain. It just makes sense. Like you said, you sit for a long time, your body can be really good at sitting. And that's why I mentioned, like you were talking about walking up hills and things like that. It's like, I would take that a step further. People don't even walk. They just go for a walk. That just alone, you get that, just that. And if you do that, like, oh, I walked, so man, I walk all the time now, but when I didn't and I would go on long walks, my shin would be exhausted because, like, I'm not used to doing that. But somehow I'd be playing sports. Like, I'd play basketball, but then walking would exhaust me. And so our bodies aren't doing the things it's meant to do. And so I love the idea of using it in the range, right? Like, we're actually using that full range, but having strength through it. And it just has to be said. People have to remind themselves, we are animals. Like, we are animals.
And like the cool thing is humans, like, the reason why humans, like, we run the world nowadays is because, and we've been so successful as a race, is because we are so adaptable, right? Like, that is like the calling, like, that's like the calling card of humans, like, that we are adaptable. And so that's why you see athletes of different sports, or, you know, people of different lifestyles, they're extremely different, and they've evolved completely different to people in other parts of the world, or people just with different lifestyles, right? Because we're just so adaptable. But it almost kind of bites us in the ass because we're so adaptable. So now we're adapting to this sedentary lifestyle and walking around on flat ground. And so, like, it hit me, you know, when I was traveling overseas and living overseas, and I was hiking up a mountain in the middle of the night because we were trying to, you know, see the sunrise. And it was one of the first things I did after I left my hometown. And, you know, this visit with the doctor was still, you know, only a couple months removed. And so I knew I had to strengthen my ankles. I knew I had to fix my range of motion. And so I'm walking up this volcano or this mountain, and I'm hiking up, and I'm just like, man, like, as I'm walking uphill, like, my Achilles is just like on fire, like absolutely on fire. And then on top of that, it's just stretching. Like, every single step, my Achilles is stretching out. And by the time I got to the top of the volcano, like, I was just like, my mind was blown. I was just like, this makes so much sense. Like, because we don't walk up and down hills anymore, we never get that stretch on our ankles, right? When you walk on flat ground, you don't get that same experience. And then when I walked down, again, it happened again. Because as I'm walking down, like, my shins were on fire. My quads were absolutely, like, swole. When I got to the bottom, just pumped full of blood after walking down this mountain for like 3-4 hours. And so, like, that was one of the things that sort of clicked in my mind, that I was like, going back to the roots of how humans moved and how we used our bodies and we evolved might be the key, might be something, you know, to look into.
So in retrospect, would you say that was your aha moment?
It was definitely one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a big one, a significant one that still stands out. Yeah. No, I love hearing that story, because I can see you kind of lighting up, and I'm like, okay, I can feel it. I'm like, yeah, this is big. That was definitely a moment for sure. And I love that. I just love that idea of just like, we're animals, man. And if you accept that, then you will understand how you need to act. Like then you'll understand that like, oh, this sitting is bad. You'll understand why like maybe taking the stairs is actually better than just sitting in an elevator. Like all these just little things, and you can do these like those, like I think almost like micro doses of just, but in normal life, you know. And so the sooner you accept that reality, you know, the better your outcomes are going to be, whether it be for training, whether it be for recovering from injuries, and then taking a step further, you know, avoiding future injuries, right? If you have that mindset and then take life and challenge life that way, you're going to probably avoid a lot of problems in your life. So in doing that, I have a couple more questions just along those lines too. So what, in your opinion, and they don't have to be long, it could be straightforward, but what would you think is the biggest obstacle for athletes who are recovering from injury that are training? So I'm beyond the point, I'm not hurt, I'm now training. What would you say is the biggest obstacle?
There's definitely a few. I think the first one I'll touch on that I see just over and over and over again is just really the piece of stop training through pain, right? Mm-hmm. Don't train through pain. Like if you have something, if you're moving through your range of motion and you feel, this isn't right, it's like there's some jabbing, tightness, pain, or it just feels like something's compressing or something even, or just there's a roadblock there, don't push through it, right? You're not going to open up that range. You're not going to get stronger there when you have that dysfunction. And it's interesting, you know, some of the athletes that we work with, you know, have literally in some cases gotten anxious because we're telling them, slow down, right? Slow down, take it one step at a time, right? We're not trying to kill you in every workout. You shouldn't be exhausted after every workout. But what happens so many times with athletes with injury is they're in a rush to get back to their sport. They think they're missing out, right? And they are you're injured. You're out of your sport, right? But you know, taking the long-term approach is always going to be the best option long term. So that's the first one, is just really stop training through pain. Take the time to rest that you need, but also take the time to move through proper progressions and regressions. You should not be squatting heavy when you have an ankle sprain, right? You might not re-sprain your ankle when you squat heavy, but you know, you're just packing on strength onto that dysfunction, onto that injury. And then is that injury gonna come back? It might resurface, right, if you don't actually take those steps. So I think that's the first one. Just getting through that mental roadblock of stop training through pain to kind of slow down. Mm-hmm. And I think the other one is just a lack of information and resources. So nowadays, in the information world that we're in, it's not necessarily about everybody having the proper everybody having access to information. It's almost, there's too much information now. So when somebody searches up like, oh, I have knee tendonitis, like what should I be doing, right? There's just so much conflicting information out there that it can be overwhelming. And then, you know, it leads to people either giving up or just accepting that injury is a part of them. And they identify, oh, I have bad knees, right? I just can't do that. I have a bad back. I have a bad ankle, right? I have a bum knee, whatever it happens to be, right? So I think the lack of proper information and coaching is definitely a roadblock for athletes as well, because a lot of athletes, they might just rehab an injury. They might go see a physical therapist or a doctor who might, you know, prescribe them some meds, prescribe them some exercise. They might do some modalities, some soft tissue work, for example, on them. And they might feel better that day. And then what happens is right away they're jumping back into their sport, or they're jumping back into training. So really just focusing on getting access to proper information. That's what we try and do at Alliance. We try and give people the tools to, you know, handle those issues and take ownership of their own body, right? So yeah, don't train through pain. You know, the piece about proper information. But I also think another roadblock is, we kind of touched on it earlier. I really liked what you said. It's your responsibility, like your health, your responsibility. And as soon as you take kind of ownership of that, you take ownership that this is my body and I need to take ownership of it, you're just going to be better off right there once you admit that. Because a lot of people, they're just looking for the quick fix. They're looking, they show up to the physiotherapist's office and they're like, fix me, right? But if you're not taking complete ownership of your body, are you really going to search high and low for the proper information? Are you really going to take all the necessary steps you need to move through that injury, right? So I would say those are probably the main ones. I'm probably missing a couple. I mean, there's a ton of reasons, as you can see when you look around athletes nowadays. It's sad to see, honestly, like everybody's dealing with injuries, and some people, they live with those injuries for years and years and years. So I'll add actually one more. Another common issue that's holding athletes back from getting through injuries, and just people in general, is that they accept that injury, right? So they might just say like, oh, I'm just going to have bad knees for the rest of my life. There's nothing I can do. Sometimes the doctor might even tell them that. I've had a doctor tell me that you can't strengthen tendons. You can't make your tendons stronger. Ridiculous. That's not true at all, right? But that's the information that's out there. And I think, a lot of times just not accepting that and taking ownership is probably the best and the first thing that you should do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Again, the ownership piece is huge. And then again, everything you're saying is just absolute truth, man. The sooner anyone who's suffering from injuries comes to that conclusion, like, okay, yeah, I do that, they will have better outcomes. Full stop, doesn't matter, right? And so you talked about some of the obstacles. So this is the last question. Maybe if you could make a top 3 list of things an athlete should know about dealing with pain and injuries, what would it be? So we understood the obstacles. Okay, these are things that they struggle with. So now maybe some keys to success. So
big time. So I think the first key is training strength through length. Okay, so training full ranges of motion. Now, a lot of times in sports, you'll hear people say like, okay, for example, if you're trying to jump higher, why would you squat below 90 degrees if when you go and do a jump, you can look at athletes and they don't go below 90 degrees when they do a max jump, right? So a lot of times trainers or people in the industry or just athletes in general will look at that and they'll be like, well, I don't need to train that range of motion, right? So I think the first key is train full range of motion. You're going to have healthier joints. Long-term, you're going to reach a higher peak, and you're just going to deal with less injuries. And then your body is just going to function better. So you're going to have a better foundation of which to build now that explosive power on top of it, right? And all those movement patterns on top of that strong, stable base. I heard somebody say this one time and it really resonated with me. Flexibility without strength is untapped potential. So if you have all the flexibility in the world and you're a wet noodle and you can move in any movement, or you can move in any plane, or you can bend all the way all over the place, but you have no strength, you're not really going to go anywhere quickly, right? But it works the same way with the opposite. So strength without flexibility is untapped potential, but flexibility without strength is also untapped potential. So if you're super strong, but you have no flexibility, well, if you're gonna sprint, right, you're not really gonna go anywhere any fast. You're gonna be moving like this, right? So if you have no range to accompany that strength, well, now you're also leaving potential on the table. So strength through length is number one, I would say, in terms of preventing injury, but also performance down the line, laying that groundwork or that foundation. Another one is structural balance. So I learned this through researching Charles Poliquin's work on how he's trained hundreds of Olympic athletes and sort of compiled optimal ratios of strength around the body. So you should be balanced throughout your body. If you're super strong, for example, just doing a bicep curl, but you have absolutely no strength, extending your arm through your tricep, well, you're going to run into issues. You're not going to be able to achieve maximum potential because your body's going to start putting all these roadblocks on you to try and protect itself. You might be really immobile, right? If you're really strong, you see some guys at the gym, they walk around, they can't extend their arms, or they're really rolled, hunched forward like this because they're really strong, pushing, but they're really weak opening up. And so I think a lot of people actually know this concept. It's so intuitive, but people seem to not really pay attention to it. A prime example of it is how many people out there have actually trained their shins. Everyone does calf raises. How many people do tib raises where you lift your toes up as high as you can and actually train your shins? Because people get super imbalanced, well, now we run into issues like shin splints because one side of the joint or one side of the structure is really strong. The other side is super untrained and weak. So you're running into issues down the line like that. And then the last thing I'll sort of touch on, I think the key to success is, I think, and this is a big topic, I talk about this a lot on our page and on our website, is self-talk and framing is super important. Like super, super important, because I can't stress that enough. Tons of people, they walk into the gym and they're already telling themselves, okay, so I grind every day and I work harder than anybody else and no days off and train through pain and no pain, no gain, all these different sayings and catchphrases. I need motivation. I need all this intensity when I work out. What happens is that your mind now is learning that training and physical activity is super taxing, super hard. And then what happens is now your mind is now trained to believe that training is really hard. And so now it's harder for you to actually motivate yourself to do it. So proper framing for an athlete is super important. Do you have a good relationship with training? Do you have a good relationship with movement? It's the same as like with food. If you have a poor relationship with food, you're not really going to achieve success in terms of your nutrition, right? So the relationship that you have with your body and with training in general is super important. So telling yourself that it's easy and that it's natural for you to be training, treating your body nicely and with respect is really important. I really think that people miss that. They get into the gym and they're just kind of thinking in that mindset of like, I got to kill myself. I got to sweat super hard. I got to be really sore. I got to be all fucked up the next day. And then they're training their mind to believe that that's super hard for them to do. So then what happens is the accountability drops, right? And the consistency drops. And you can take all the supplements in the world. You can be with the best trainer in the world. You can have the best exercises. But if your accountability isn't following that, or you're not taking the steps and actually completing your workouts because you can't motivate yourself to do it, or you're thinking in your mind, oh, I don't want to be super sore the next day, and I'm just gonna take a day off because I'm so gassed, right? Well, your nutrition and all these other things, all these other supplements you might be taking, or you might have the greatest trainer in the world, you're still not going to get the results that you want, right? So training your mind to really have a good relationship with training, I think, is really key. And I can't stress that enough.
And that, that's a great way to wrap it up, because I'll just add to that, when it comes to recovering from an injury, then mind has to be the most important thing, because if you don't have that belief, or you don't frame the experience you're going to have in a positive light, and you're like, I don't want to do that, it's not that important, or whatever it may be, again, your outcomes aren't going to be great. They're going to have negative outcomes. And so I love that perspective. It's a great way to end. Matt Koenig, thank you. Alliance Athletics. Again, you'll be able to see all the social handles below the video, on the webpage. So check out what they do. They do great stuff. And they've also generously given away some prizes. So, if you're watching this video right now, you probably still have some time to register, and maybe you'll be the one that gets a chance to try some of the programming. So thank you again, Matt. And yeah,
appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Darcy. This was really awesome. Thanks for having me on to share my values and my beliefs on this. We really like what you're doing. And I'll just put one thing out there to anyone else watching this. If you have any questions or any nagging injuries, or just you need some help in general, we answer every single message. So send us a DM, send us an email with a question, and we'll help you out. We'll help you get to where you need to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah. Have a good one.